Welcome to this Excel trick. Today's one is another relating to the use of different Excel tricks to help develop strength program templates. Now, I don't think that having pictures inside a strength program is always a good idea. I think in most cases it's not, but let's say you wanted to have a special program such as a rehab program, for example, where you wanted to have some clear pictures, or if it was a development program for athletes that you may not be coaching actively in the gym, you might want to have some pictures. So this little tutorial is going to show you one of the ways that you might be able to accomplish this, and there are several ways to do so. One of them works okay but not great, which is using a bit of a VLOOKUP trick, and I'll post a link to that video. It is a Mr. Excel one, so you know it's going to be pretty good. The second option is to use a bit of VBA, and that's what I'm going to do today. And even within that, there are lots of different ways you can do it. One way is to have all the pictures inside the file, and you simply relocate them from, I guess, the pictures sheet to the program sheet when you make your selection. The other way, or the way that I'm going to show you today, is where those pictures sit inside a folder on your computer and it just links the pictures. So all the different methods have some pitfalls, but let's just go ahead anyway, because opening your eyes to what's possible allows people to get on with things and make something cool for themselves. So here we go. To get set up, basically I'm just going to do 3 exercises, and to make it seem a little bit more real, I'm just going to add some extra stuff, not just the picture. So starting point, I've made a little tables page, and the first thing I want to do is have exercise name. So I'm just going to call this list of exercises, and I'm going to call this whole table right down to column E table of exercises. So I use that format quite regularly. If I'm doing something for a drop down list, I use list as the prefix, and if I'm doing a table with all sorts of columns, I call it a table as the prefix. So here we are here, data validation menu. We've done this plenty of times. When I hit F3, it brings up the named ranges that I've already defined, and I'm just going to choose list of exercises. Alright, so now we have, I just made, I think, 6 or 7 options here. So now that's there. I had a column, and I believe it was column E, so that's column number 5. Just going to do a VLOOKUP to pull in a little description that we might write about excuse me, about the exercise. So there's our VLOOKUP. Look up the exercise name in the first column of the table, bring us back whatever is in column 5 of the same row, and we'll get just some token gesture description that I wrote. Obviously you'll have a bit more information there yourself. You might have some teaching cues or focus points, but the concept is the same, and I'll just copy that to our other 2 exercises and make sure that it works by, there we go, selecting an exercise. Brilliant. Okay, so that part's in place. And now finally, one more thing. I'm just going to call that list of reps and sets. So we've done this kind of data validation process many times before. Hopefully you're getting more and more comfortable with it. Hit F3, list set reps, and we're good now. So this is obviously a really simplified way to do such a thing, but it's really just illustrating I guess the kind of process that you'd go through, you'd obviously want to have a bit more complexity to this kind of thing than one off simply put down one cell for sets, reps and rests. Now what we really want to do is the picture part. So to have this concept work for a large number of exercises, it's really not feasible to have them anywhere inside the file. It's much better to have them inside a folder on your computer. Now it's really important that that folder doesn't change its file path, but once you set it up the first time, it should be okay. So I've got a folder. You can see the file path up the top there. It's in my Google Drive in a folder called xpics, and here are the 7 pictures that I just dumped in here. I haven't done this kind of stuff for a while, so I like to dig deep for some old photos that I took years ago. Now if I right click on any of these pictures and I click properties, what we will see is a location. And so I'm just going to select that and copy it. I'm going to go to my Excel file. I'm going to put it in this folder here, and very importantly I'm going to put a backslash on the end. Okay, so that's good. That's the first step. Now I have to complete the full file path, which consists of the folder and the picture name. So the picture name includes a dot and a file type, in this case here JPG. I deliberately put this one in here even though it's a rubbish picture, because it's a different file type. It's a bitmap, BMP. So just to raise your awareness that that is important. And really just to make the full file path is quite simple, just using an ampersand to connect 2 text strings. We will get the ability to drag this down and have all of our file paths in place. Alright, nearly there. What I want to be able to do is say what is the file path that is from column D of the exercise selected in exercise number 1 on the program page. So I'm going to use a VLOOKUP for that. Click on the tab, go to the exercise name, which is cell B3. Fill in the rest of the VLOOKUP. The file path is in column D, which is row 4. And there's, I think, our VLOOKUP. Yep, that looks pretty good to me. And so if I change that to a different exercise, let's say deadlift, we get deadlift there. So that's great. And did notice that the picture already appeared because I've got the code already working. Now I haven't taken you through that part yet, so I'll just step into that now. First thing I'll do is I'll just make sure I align those other 2 cells, so that is B17 and B31. Sometimes it's easier just to manually complete those. There we go. So we've got our 3 exercises. Now what I want to show you is the nasty bit, that is the code. So go to the developer tab, click on Visual Basic. Now we need to have code in 3 different places. It's not a lot of code, but we need a little bit of code to be accomplishing 3 different tasks. It needs to be in 2 different places, but it's 3 different things. The first thing, and the most important really, is to be able to add the picture. And this piece of code up the top here, I've called it add pick 1. Basically what it is doing is deleting picture 1, and we'll get to that shortly. So if there was already a picture there because you had made a different selection, then to delete it. Second thing is select the cell where you want the picture to be pasted. So we've selected cell D3, and what you'll see is that the picture is exactly in the top corner of cell D3. Next, we use a command that is called insert picture. Now that is effectively doing exactly the same as clicking in a cell, going to the insert tab and choosing picture. That gives you an explorer menu and you select your picture and it is inserted. So that's really what we're replicating with that line of code. How it knows what picture to insert is based upon the file path that we are giving it from the sheet called tables in cell C17. And so if we go to table C17, what we see is that file path there. An exercise called bbfrontlunge.jpg in the folder that I've described previously. If there is no picture that matches that, it'll be blank. But if there is, it'll simply insert that there. The next thing it does is it scales it to a certain height, and I'll show you what happens if I modify that. Let's say making it half the size. It makes it smaller. So that is simply a selection height parameter. So 150 is the height that I've chosen. You can choose whatever you like, and in terms of deciding what to choose, what you want to base it on is the alignment of your row height. So if we click on any row, you can see row height is an option here, and at the moment it is 15. I believe that's the default. So if you've got a row height of 20 because you've got large size font or whatever, then you might want to choose multiples of 20 for your height of the images so it aligns nicely with I guess the cell borders and the like. Last thing it does is, because the picture is still selected, I just clicked on any cell and I just selected E16 randomly so that the picture is now deselected. You could avoid this one, but oftentimes when you've got things selected and you don't know, you can drag them out of place accidentally and so on. So that's the routine that I did. Now I wasn't smart enough to be able to use the same piece of code for all 3 drop down boxes, so I gave up on that. I'm sure it's very doable, but I gave up on that and I simply rewrote another piece of code for the second exercise, and it's identical except for the fact that it's looking in a slightly different cell to paste, and it's looking in a slightly different cell to get the file reference, and similarly add pick 3. So they all are identical code except for a small difference in the location of the picture and a small difference in the cell where the file path is. Otherwise completely identical code. Now in the first in each of them, one of the first pieces of code is called delete pick 3. Now I didn't do that one. I'll explain that to you now, using delete pick 1 as my example. It is setting the worksheet so it knows what sheet to be deleting picks from. At the moment I have decided that it'll look through cell C1 to I16. So C1 to I16, and it'll delete any pictures that it finds in that cell range. To be honest, I can probably cut that down to, say, 13 so it doesn't overlap on other parts of the spreadsheet. So yeah, that looks better to me. So it's there, selecting anything in that space and deleting the image. So if I run that, click anywhere inside the code and click this play button, what we should find is that the picture is gone. Yep, it has gone. So really that's all that it's doing, is it's clearing out any image in those cells so that you can put the new one in there. And so that's repeated 3 times. Like I said, I'm sure there's a way to make that one piece of code that could be applied to the 3 exercises, but I didn't have the time to really Google and find out and test and figure out that particular part, so I just did 3. So hopefully that is okay. Now the final piece of code is to make it happen automatically when you click the drop down box, and that works slightly differently to normal VBA. Almost always when you're doing basic VBA programming, the code sits inside a module, and you'll see here it's called module 1. But there are all sorts of cool things you can do when you start getting a bit deeper into VBA, where the code sits inside either the workbook or on the worksheet. Now, something that might sit inside the workbook is that, for example, when you close the file or when you open the file, it runs a few pieces of code that might sort a list alphabetically, or updates and charts, or go to the web and pull off the latest data and so on. So that's the kind of code you might put on this workbook, and to do so you'd simply right click on it and go view code, and then you could just start typing or pasting in from something you've got from elsewhere. Secondly, if you go into each worksheet, and this is what we're going to do, right click view code, you'll see the piece of code that I have written. I'll just get rid of that. They were some of my failed attempts. Now, the thing that I did when I set this up is I use these drop down boxes up the top. I'm not probably the person to be listening to about really detailed VBA instruction. I'm just telling you a few things that I know. You click on the worksheet, and there's a drop down box up the top that you can just choose general worksheet, and you can also choose a few actions. So you can choose something to happen when you update a table, or double click, or something like that. So I just picked change, because when you are picking an item from a drop down box, what you have is the worksheet changing, and so that triggers it. And so I was able to figure out a way to have one piece of code, and that is simply saying if the cell that I just changed is row 3, then run the piece of code called add pick 1. If the cell that I just changed is row 17, then add the piece of code called add pick 2, and the same for add pick 3. And so that's how the last piece of the puzzle is put together. Change the drop down box, fires the piece of code off. The first thing it does is delete the old picture. The next thing it does is paste in the new picture, and likewise down here. And so good potential for this to work in an inside a program builder. I would think that it's a lot of work and a lot of mess to do this if you're doing a really complex exercise program, but there's some value in it, and it could also be used to insert a picture of the athlete if you're doing customized individual reports. I think that's a good option that I'm actually working on for someone at the moment, and I think that's actually quite a neat way to take advantage of this trick. So really it's up to you now to play around with this concept. There are 2 or 3 other ways to do this, and it's important for me to mention that I haven't tried this on my Mac yet. There are some differences in how file paths work on a Mac, and I am not an expert on that, but I'll figure it out by just poking around a little bit, and when I do, I'll post a new video. So with a few caveats, here's an interesting little trick to try. Last thing to mention, and importantly to mention, is if I emailed the spreadsheet to someone else, these pictures would not show. There would be little red X's. It would be unable to locate the picture because it's just a linked picture, it's not a pasted picture. So really, as a program writing option, you're going to have to use File, Save As, and then do PDF. So really, as a program option, you're going to have to save as a PDF to really make use of these images and sending them to someone else. So all sorts of pitfalls with this process, as you can see, but nevertheless it's got some good applications. So I will happily send you this file if you want it. Drop me a line, and I look forward to doing another video shortly with the Mac half of this task.